Death or Prison, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. Two of the men you are about to hear have spent almost 36 years in prison. Let's join Johnny Branham and Elmo Golden in part one of their discussion with a representative from law enforcement, Commander Rolando Silva.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Death or Prison podcast, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. I am Johnny Branham, and to my right, Mr. Elmo Big Mo Golden, and to my left, Captain Rolando Silva with law enforcement. And today we have a title that is called Us Against Them. And you might be asking, well, why would a title like that exist? Well, we're going to dive into that right now. Captain Silva, tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how you started into law enforcement.
Well, let me just start by saying I really don't like talking too much about myself. I'm not trying to be this humble guy, but honestly, I know it's important to set the context. So let me just go through it really, really quick. I began as a young man when I was 19 years of age, when a person came up to me and said, "Hey, I think you become a good cop. You'd be a good cop." And that thought never crossed my mind until that time. But when he said that word at the right time, it made all the difference in my life. So from that point forward, I decided I'd take a look at it. And he invited me to do a ride-along with him. And in the mean streets of Fort Lauderdale in the middle of the night, I fell in love with the job after I did that one ride-along. Since then, I pursued it with everything I had. I was a young officer at the age of 20 with the city of West Palm Beach. And from there, I moved on to the bigger agency where I am now. In my tenure in law enforcement, I've had an opportunity to do it just about everything, from being a detective to being a narcotics agent to being, a supervisor, just in all kinds of capacities with law enforcement. And it's what I still do today. I do hold the title of commander, which I am now responsible for quite a sizable group of officers. And I enjoy it. It's exactly what I feel like I've been called to do with my life. And I'm going to keep doing it for a few more years because Father Time is catching up with me and I'm going to have to retire on. But I still enjoy very much what I do.
Now, many of our listeners are either incarcerated. Some of them are the family members of an incarcerated. So do you believe that law enforcement has a role to play in combating recidivism? And if so, what is that role?
Well, I certainly do. At the end of the day, I don't pass judgment on any agency that currently doesn't participate in that. Honestly, everything is a matter of budgeting when it comes to law enforcement. And when you talk about things like reducing, budgets of law enforcement, defunding the police, honestly, you really got to think about what we're talking about, because these extra things like getting involved in programs that reduce recidivism, those are things that, go to our core mission, which is to keep public safety first and foremost, but it's also an additional objective, a task that it's got to be funded to participate in it. I mean, that's just simply what it'll require more people from law enforcement to be involved in it to actually make that happen. Now, I've taken a look at some of the programs out there, and I can tell you in my own command, I have an officer assigned to me. She's a young woman. She's great at what she does, but it's primarily dealing with juveniles. And these are juveniles who have gone through the criminal justice system and are now currently on probation. So what she does is she helps out by keeping an extra pair of eyes on these people, these kids in the program. And also, she is like a go-to person for these kids. So when they have problems in school, they have problems in just in general, they go to her, and she helps ensure that they get the right people in their lives and get some success. So in my own little world, I certainly believe in it, and I have that person in the juvenile kind of arena, but certainly law enforcement would be served to be involved in this program. And in the programs that they have throughout the country, I see that primarily what they do, there's one of three things that law enforcement gets involved with when they're involved in these types of programs, is to be an extra set of eyes for probation and parole, to encourage compliance, and also to be the connecting person, with people in the community to help the inmates get, GEDs or whatever else, jobs, whatever else that they need as they're, trying to find their way back into society.
When I was growing up, we had we had this one officer would always be in our neighborhood. His name was Buffalo. And Buffalo would organize these boxing matches for, we're talking early 70s, like 75, 76. And Buffalo would organize these boxing matches for us. And everybody in the neighborhood knew him. You would always see Buffalo at the local restaurants, at the local McDonald's or some of the soul food restaurants. But one thing I remember, the connection that he had with the community is what he was just open. And during that time, we didn't have all the challenges that we're facing right now. But during that time, Buffalo made it his business to have a relationship with the community. He was there more as a fixture in the community than some of the fathers were. And so you're speaking about a go-to. We need more officers like that can have a relationship in the community. I want to tell you that he was instrumental in some of the decision making that I made early on in my life. Even though I fell off the wagon a little bit, we're talking 40 years now, I still remember some of those things that Buffalo had. He began to teach us. And the thing was, he was there. He was there. And being there is part of prevention. The media has begun to betray us against them now. It's actually beginning to be embedded in our minds. I want to tell you this snippet. I have some kids that I mentor, and when we're riding and they see a police officer, the first thing they do is say, "There goes the police." So one day I actually got a police officer. And we had an event. We was doing a food drive, and I took the kids out to do the food drive. And I asked the officer, would he show up? And so he showed up, and I said, there go the police. And he embraced them. He talked to them. He turned the lights on for them because he knew the importance of developing that relationship with those kids at a young age. Because I'm just going to be honest, in our community, we're starting to say that it's really law enforcement is trying to harm us. And that's really not the case. And once we start talking more, I'm going to talk to our audience and show them that it's not the case.
Why do you think some of those thought processes exist in certain communities in regards to law enforcement from your perspective?
I try not to oversimplify things when I answer questions that are quite extensive in scope like that. But to the extent that you have certain people in the community that have kind of a bad image of law enforcement, well, it has to be, I believe, an issue with perhaps how we're portrayed in the media. But you know what? Notwithstanding all the efforts that law enforcement puts into hiring good people, and believe me, there's a lot. There are psychological exams, there are written exams, there are polygraphs, there are extensive backgrounds just to make sure the person's qualified to go in the academy. Now, once they go into the academy, which is a 6-month experience, there's all kinds of measures in place there to make sure they're physically fit, to make sure emotionally they can handle like a drill sergeant on them. They can handle learning the difficult subject matter. Sometimes in the law it gets very complex. These things are in place so that, again, we weed out bad people that don't need to be police officers. And I teach at the academy. I haven't taught in a while, but when I taught, I used to ask everybody who came into my class, why is it that you want to be a police officer? And invariably I'd get some variation of they want to make a difference. They want to be part of the good guys, part of the solution to the problems. Yes, an uncle did it, and yes, they got the idea from family members or others, but ultimately that is the underlying reason that they want to get into the profession. So going through the police academy, then you go through a field training program, and then there you have to go for like 12 to 16 weeks riding along with an experienced officer who's testing you to make sure that you can handle the multifaceted problems that all occur at one time. Officer safety issues, as you know, things get real dangerous. All this is in place to make sure we have the right people in our profession. But again, notwithstanding, or better said, in spite of those efforts, we sometimes don't get it right. And officers who start out, sometimes they start out with the best of intentions, kind of lose their way. And when they do lose their way, that becomes a problem for the rest of us. Right? And we've seen all these things on video, on television, being spread throughout the country, portraying this image that we are not the good guys. We're not out here trying to do the right thing. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous for everybody involved. And that really is something that we, as a profession, have to kind of keep working on no matter what. Because we got to make sure we keep our focus. We do what's right at all times. And we need more officers like Buffalo in the game. That's the real truth. And lastly, what I'll say about it is I always feel like the onus, the burden is on law enforcement, right? It's our job to be like Buffalo, to go to the community and do our best to let them know that we do care. Because we do. The fact of the matter is we actually do. There's the old adage that people don't care what you know until they know you care.
Right.
Well, we have to kind of establish that. And there shouldn't be a problem in that because ultimately that's why we got into the job in the first place. Now, I'm going to tell you, in our world, life gets hard. Right? The system can be very harsh on law enforcement. We make a mistake, and these are not mistakes of the heart, but just mistakes of the mind. Things happen.
It's hard because we don't want to understand that you are maybe a father, that you're a brother. We've taken that away from you. And I'm speaking, from a standpoint of somebody being on the other side. Not whether I committed a crime. I'm just saying, just as a regular person. We don't see law enforcement as our equal. We hold you to a higher expectation than maybe we should, but at the same time, you have to go home. You have to take care of your kids. You have to take care of your wife, your family. You have mortgages. You have bills to pay. And in our community, we don't want you to have those things. We don't want to look at you that way. And so we dehumanize each other in that manner. And because of that, when something does happen, we become less compassionate and less understanding. We think that, this incident has happened, so we want to just pretty much hurt everybody that's on that side of the law enforcement. And I want to try to use this time now to show that we are equals. He has a job to do. We have a job to do. And when we begin to understand each other and not separate ourselves from one another, then we can better work in the community as equals and get some of the problems solved in our communities. And so I really wanted to make sure that our viewers understand that you know, if you would talk about that a little bit, that you have a regular life.
Well, you hit on something that's very important, and that is that we are human.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that job requires superhuman decision-making, superhuman abilities, and sometimes we don't rise up to that challenge and get it right. And when that goes bad, people come down on us pretty hard.
Yeah.
So not in spite of our best efforts, sometimes we just don't get it right. But we are human, and you have to look at us as that. We are called to do something that's very challenging at times, and a lot of times we get it right. A lot of times we get it right. You'd be surprised how hard these men and women work and train to make sure we get it right, because we understand what's at stake. We have a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
When we arrest somebody, we're taking their liberty away. We're writing it all up and making it go in a way that ultimately has a huge impact on whoever we're dealing with. What we do is important, and it requires us to get it right all the time. And let's just face it. At the end of the day, we're not superhuman. We're just human. And we work hard. We work hard to try to get it right, but we can't get it right 100% of the time. It's almost impossible.
I think that's so important to note that everyone can relate to being human. No matter what job you're doing, no matter where you are in society, you're going to have things that you do that are not necessarily 100% correct all the time. Your heart is there to do it right 100%, but of course, there's the human errors. You mentioned we were talking off the air about your faith. How does that play a role in what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, for me personally, I can tell you that Colossians 3:23 is my one scripture that I keep in mind, and that is, whatever you do, do it as unto the Lord and not unto men. So I take this job and look at it as it's an opportunity. I am a steward of this opportunity, and it's my job to work as unto the Lord. And that means when I'm not being looked at and I'm not in the public view, whatever it is I'm doing, I should be doing it in a way that pleases the Lord. And so for me personally, that's what I keep in front of me.
I remember my last ride along, and I say that because my last arrest. Here, this is going to be interesting. Part of my last charges, it included suicide. So during my arrest, before the officers got there, I had given up. I wasn't strong enough to take my own life. So I said, you know what? I'm getting in trouble. I got in a high-speed chase. The officers, they came behind me. I ran into a car that had a child in it. 2 people and a child in the car. I ran right into the car. And when the officers got there, I had it already in my mind, I'm going to make them kill me. There's something we call it's death by cop, suicide. I was at that point. I got out of the car, and the officer told me, said, get on the ground. And I wouldn't get on the ground. I had no reason doing 17 years. But that decision by not obeying the officers, it catapulted my charges up to that point. The officer said, get on the ground again. Another officer arrived. I wouldn't get on the ground. I said, I'm not getting on the ground. And so I attacked him. And when I did that, I unholstered his gun. There's a charge called deprived of means of protection. And there was nothing that was going to stop me from hurting him so that he can end my life. And it's plain as day because, there's with me, I'm big on forgiveness now. I want to be forgiven. So when I attacked this man, I didn't think about his children. I didn't think about his home. I didn't think about his wife. I didn't think about his family, his mother. I didn't think about any of that. I had already dehumanized him. I had already made plans that this is it. This is something I haven't really shared with anybody because it wasn't God time, but this is God time now to share this. And this is the time now where I can be healed. So I'm thankful that you're here and that our producer got you here so that I can apologize to all law enforcement because sometimes we get to the point to where we make you our enemy. And I had no business doing that. Somebody else called the officer because I was acting up. They didn't call the officer because I was being good. They was calling the police because there was a need for help. And that was a crazy man on set. I had been snorting cocaine that whole week. I had been drinking Jose Cuervo that whole week because I was self-medicating myself because I was having mental issues. I was depressed. I was suffering from anxiety. There was nobody I could share this with. And so you go into this downward spiral, and because everybody says that we have this enemy in our neighborhood, I said, well, let me just go through the motions and just end it. So I get sentenced to the 20-year sentence. I stay in the county jail for 2 years, and I go through the whole transformation of repentance. God, I'm sorry, everything. And I couldn't wait to see those officers in court so I can apologize to them. And I never had the chance to do it. Officer got on the stand and said that 12 years, at the particular time he had did 12 years in law enforcement. And to hear him say that he had never been so afraid in his life, in his whole life, not because he was law enforcement, I felt like a heel because I had terrified somebody. I'm a terrorist in my own country, in my own nation, in my own community. I'm a terrorist. And the other part of this is that while I was incarcerated, there were things happening to my family. You know? And I prayed for law enforcement to take care of my family while I was incarcerated. When I explained to you, there were things that I don't even want to talk about that was happening in my family. Robbery, rape, murder. While I did those 17 years. So the same people that I was trying to hurt, I needed them now to go by my house, to be those eyes, to take care of my family until I can get home. And so we have a distorted view now of us against them. And it's because we're letting everybody put ideas in our heads to stay away from each other. I want to make sure that you guys understand, even the authority that's over you in those institutions, they're not there to cause you any harm or pain. When I went before the judge, I always thought about, what if I went there to be married? What if the judge were to join me with a wife? What if the judge was to award me with something? Then I would love him. But I'm standing in front of the judge now, shameful. Somebody that can't even live in society. What am I expected for him to do? He has a charge to keep now. He has to hand down a sentence that protects the whole community. And we don't think like that because the crime was committed out of our own selfishness anyway. I wasn't thinking about my family. I wasn't thinking about any of my friends or anything that I wanted to leave behind in a way that would amplify that this was a good man. And so, this has been hurting me for, like I said, for years. I've been home 18 months and I've been waiting for an opportunity to actually lift up the law enforcement, not only before men, but before God too, and tell them to protect them. I'm not worrying about the defunding or anything else that's going on in our community. And I'm speaking from my own experience and my own heart, that they need us also. Law enforcement needs us also. Our communities are falling apart because we won't work together. And we keep operating out of this mean streak that we've developed and not out of compassion. And I hope today that can change.
Elmo, as I see the work that you do now with Lean On Me USA and the way you are reaching back and trying to help others, I look at you as a trophy of God's grace. You really are, and you haven't forgotten these stories, and it's true. You just underscored how difficult the job of law enforcement can actually be. Because I can tell you from personal experience where I've been in the chase, and I knew that I was the person in the chase. Yeah, somebody else has got the stolen car, but I'm the one that's going on after it. And then lo and behold, car collides, kills somebody. Don't you think that weighs on me? It does. I'm the one who continued to chase. Many, many years ago, I've been to a house where, I don't want to go into a bunch of war stories, but just to underscore how difficult the job of law enforcement can be. I knock on a door where we hear a domestic disturbance. A person who calls doesn't identify exactly where it's coming from, so I'm playing a little bit of a chess game trying to identify where that domestic is occurring. The person doesn't answer the door, talks to me from the other side and says, you got the wrong house. Well, I have to make a decision. Can I force my way in that home at that moment with what I have, or I don't? Well, I decided I didn't, and I left. Well, as it turns out, he had a woman behind the door at knife point. When I left, he took her out to the Beeline Highway and shot her point blank 4 times. Now, those are decisions that weigh on law enforcement. So you need to understand, and that's just me. And that's just in my little, and I could tell you more. But it just underscores how difficult the job of law enforcement can actually be, especially in some of these communities which are high crime. There's always stuff going on. And I really appreciate the idea that we need to have compassion. We do. We need to have compassion. Life is a little bit of an uneven playing field, even at the beginning. People are born into families without fathers that stuck around, and they're, without getting all the breaks that others have gotten. And we need to remember that. It's easy to forget. It's easy to forget. And we just want to put people in a box and say, well, they're just all this or they're just all that. And we cannot be like that in law enforcement. We cannot be. And if we start thinking along those lines, there's something wrong and we got to be checked. And we do. We check people. We check people on their attitudes all the time. But I appreciate everything you had to say there because that's powerful.
One thing from a biblical perspective is that God has ordained all authority. And I think the healing process or the understanding process, as you were talking about, Elmo, begins when we start to see people the way God sees people as human beings. God did send his son to die for everyone. Mm-hmm. So that person was precious in God's eyes. And I think sometimes we forget that the person in the uniform takes it off. And like what Elmo so eloquently, how you put it, some of them have wives, they have children, they have mothers that are living, and they're human beings, but with a job to do. And I love the way you put it when you said, if I were standing before this same judge and he were marrying me to my wife, I wouldn't have this taste in my mouth about him saying what he's saying, or in a situation where I need law enforcement to now protect my family. I will say personally that I appreciate the job that each and every one of you all do in keeping our communities and our families safe.
Just to bring it in a little bit closer, one of the officers that I assaulted, I hit him in the eye and swole his eye up. Later on, and when I mean later on, I'm talking probably about 5 to 7 years, I thought about what if he had a son and he walked in the house and his son saw his eye like that? What would be going through his son's mind? Or if he had a wife and what would she say that maybe perhaps next time it'll be even worse, he may not even come home? And I also thought about the medical expenses, the loss of wages, the total ripple effect of what he's going through in my own life. What I would view the ripple effects of what he's going through and how it affected his life. And I think that needs to be more of an awareness of what happens when law enforcement maybe don't get it right, have problems at home. Do you think that they take their problems from home to the job? Sometimes you do, I do. So we have to start looking at them as real people and start finding a solution for us to realize that they need to be comforted too. They need the same thing we need. Now, here's my question. How do we communicate with each other?
That's a big question, right? How do we do a better job of interacting, relating to each other, doing the compassion thing that we're talking about? How can law enforcement better serve the community? Now, you mentioned quite a few things about the ripple effects and the harm that comes to officers when things go bad on the job. One of the big takeaways I would like people to take out of this podcast that we're doing today, there's two mainly I'd love to see. A full appreciation for the difficulties of law enforcement. It is a hard job. We just talked about some of the things that go wrong and how we're expected to deal with everything right all the time. And we are human. So necessarily that can't necessarily play out. I want there to be an appreciation for how difficult the job can be. The other thing I would like to also know, we know what we signed up for when we took this job. Nobody forced us. We're not here under draft. Mm-hmm. I know sometimes it feels like we're in a war, but we're not drafted into this job. We all volunteered and took an oath to uphold the Constitution and enforce the laws of the state. So that's why we signed up for this job. We went into it voluntarily. What I want, the other big takeaway for you guys to know is a lot of men and women in this job work hard. They work hard. They have the heart and they have the capacity. They have the talent, if you will, to do this very, very difficult job and do it well. Now, I can give you stories upon stories and examples upon examples of why that is true. But just, I hope you'll understand maybe from this conversation that we work hard, we in law enforcement, 90%, 95%, maybe let's go even higher. They work hard to do this very difficult job right. Did we get it right 100% of the time? We already said no. But you'd be surprised how often we do get it right. And it comes from training. It comes from staying on top of our game, just like any other job. That's what we do. And we signed up for this, and we know what we're getting into, and we still love it. We still love it. We love making a difference. We love doing the right thing, being on the right side of issues and helping people. You got to remember, we deal with people, not just the ones who offend, but those who get offended. So we have a duty, an obligation to help these folks. We get it right a lot of the time, and it's not by accident. It's because of the quality of the people that are in this profession.
Thank you so much, Captain Silva. You all have been listening to the Death or Prison podcast brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. You've been listening to episode 1 of our conversation with Captain Rolando Silva in law enforcement. Stay tuned because you're going to be able to tune in next week to episode 2 of a continued conversation. I am Johnny Branham. To my right is Mr. Elmo Golden. This again has been the Death or Prison podcast. It's Death or Prison, but we say choose life. We invite you to the leanonmeusa.org website, where you or your family can click the middle button and be connected to a welcoming, mentoring church. Once you click the button, you fill in your name, email address, phone number, city, state, zip, and leave a comment. We would love to hear from you or your family.
Looking for a welcoming church? Connect at leanonmeusa.org. Death or Prison is a production of leanonmeusa.org. Copyright 2020. Death or Prison is offered for information only and is not intended as legal advice. Thank you for listening.
I can change the world. Feed one, teach one boy and girl. Maybe we can change the world.